Okay, I think that's enough time. So, good afternoon, Pranam Dar, everybody, and welcome. For those that don't know me, I'm Mark Brace, Head of Wales Safer Communities Network, and welcome to today's session, which is part of the network's Safer Communities Awareness Week. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Ben Lloyd from G4S, who will be giving us an overview of their work, focusing on working together for better outcomes for people facing complex needs. And although I expect Ben will touch upon it in his presentation, I can highly recommend their 2023-24 Impact Report, which contains some great case studies and some really good examples of positive outcomes. So I highly recommend that, and hopefully you can put a link in the chat bar as well. So as part of the week, we've also launched the network's second annual awards event, which will take place at Wrexham Football Club on the 28th of November. So please see our website for more details on that and how to submit nominations. Nominations close at 5 p.m. on the 11th of October, so there's still plenty of time. So before handing over to Ben, just to remind you that the session is recorded. So if you do not wish to appear, please turn your camera off. As ever, can you make sure you're on mute unless you want to come in and raise your hand if you want to come in. But there will be chance for questions at the end. And please make the most of the chat box. Looking forward to picking up any comments and questions as we go through, and then we can answer them in the question and answer session at the end. So if everybody's okay with that, on that note, then over to you, Ben.
Thank you everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining. I recognise some names in the list of people who have logged on. That's great. So some of you might already know some of what I'm going to share. It's going to be more of a reflective session, really talking about our experience and my experience in the role that I'm in now in terms of collective responsibility and working in consortium. I think I'm going to try and share my screen at this point, and as soon as I do, I won't be able to see the chat box or anyone's facial expressions if your faces are indeed on here. So I'm going to share it. If anything goes wrong with the share, please just speak, and we'll see what we can do about fixing it. Is that coming through okay?
Yep, that's fine.
Great. Okay. So that's the title. And the body of the presentation is here. So I'm going to take just 3 points really, and just introducing me and G4S Community, who we are, what we do, talk about our experience working in collaboration, and then what we've learned, and not everything that we've learned, because some of it might not be in any way useful to you, but hopefully some of what we learned that might be useful to discuss today. The imagery is going to be very basic, so yeah, don't expect anything really impressive from that. Hopefully we can just have a conversation, and for me, you know, if you wanted to raise something during the presentation, I'm happy, but please do make notes and ask any questions later if there's anything that passes you by here and you want to pick up at the end. So yeah, that's all there. I'm not going to be pressing buttons to reveal bullet points. But yeah, just an introduction to me, really. I'm the director of G4S Community. I don't like using the word director because it you know, I'm not massively into hierarchy, and I feel a little bit embarrassed by big titles. So I'm from Swansea. I now live in Clywch. I did a music degree before joining probation, which is not the well-trodden path, I totally know. But I did it for a reason, and we'll get on to that. I was a PSO, probation services officer, and then a probation officer across Dyfed Powys. And then I became a manager in South Wales in the Swansea office. I worked a lot in magistrates' courts and Crown Court. I really enjoyed working in probation. When the Transforming Rehabilitation Project took hold 2014, 15, 16, I was put into the CRC, that's the outsourced section of the probation services landscape, and after a little while I left probation to work for G4S. My background personally, I'm a Christian, and part of my faith and understanding of the world in that sense meant that I really wanted to help and support people. That was part of who I felt I was. my family background, there was a bit of offending in the family. There was a lot of substance misuse in and around my family, and that really just supported my my urge to get involved professionally and as an occupation to try and help people. So when I joined probation, I joined probation partly out of those influences, and when I got in, I found a really good balance between rehabilitating people, helping people, and supporting change. And then on the other side, at the time, the prevailing ideology was that we were actually, we were all about punishment as well, and the correct punishment and the correct public protection. And at the time, given my my background, I thought that's a balance that I like, and I thoroughly enjoyed working in probation. I probably wouldn't have left if it wasn't for transforming rehabilitation, but that's the way it went. And when TR took place, I was put into the outsourced section, and although I think I'd developed as a very public sector orientated person in my value system, and I felt that that was the right thing. Public sector should run public services. I think my outlook changed when that outsourcing took place, and the outsourcing didn't succeed. It wasn't a massive success. There was a lot of criticism at the time. There was even more afterwards, and I think it changed probation, it changed me, and it changed my outlook on leaving probation or working elsewhere. So as that was happening, in addition to the transforming rehabilitation upheaval and change, I also had this, as I've said, alluded to, this experience of family difficulties in my family and some offending behaviour. And so as I was a probation officer, I would look at Park Prison, because that was our local private prison run by G4S, and I would be suspicious of any notion that a private company should run a public service. And in my interactions with Park, although I didn't have any negative interactions with Park, I still had an inbuilt bias against it, until when I was working in Crown Court and one of my close relatives was sentenced at Crown Court and started serving a sentence in Park Prison. I very much changed my outlook. And I changed my outlook because when it came to what was delivered by Park, I couldn't find any difficulties with it. So it was my brother. My brother was given a lot of opportunity, and he developed really well inside of Park. I know other relatives of mine who were visiting. My mum visited. She was treated really well. And the opportunities that my brother was having, my mother was really, really pleased with and really encouraged by. And so when I considered how a public service could be delivered by a private organisation, when it came to delivery, when it came to the people working with the people, I thought, yeah, this can happen. And I was comfortable with it. So at the point where I was looking for other things other than probation, I found a job going in G4S and applied for it. There's a bit of a turnaround from being pretty public sector, and I think at one point I might have even been a NAPO rep. NAPO being the Union of Probation Officers, or the Association of Probation Officers, which acts as a union. So I did have militant tendencies at one stage, and then I worked for G4S. Fascinatingly, although I was a Christian, I got chatting with a chaplain in Cardiff Prison shortly after moving into the job, and he suggested I'd gone to work for the dark side. Being a man of faith, I wasn't entirely sure how he managed to equate G4S with the dark side, but he managed it, and I said, yeah, I think that must be, if that's the way you see it, that's what I've done. So G4S are a multinational company. They're huge. I say they because we work in a very small part of it in Wales, and I think there are 800,000 people working for G4S across the globe. They do some astonishing work, and we hear through communications internally about things like minefield clearance in Sierra Leone. There are pieces of work being done that are very specialist all over the globe. And what's interesting is that although it's a very diverse company, it's easily targeted as a whole by any individual failure in any part of it. So I was thinking about how we could equate this to other agencies, and really Whitbread, they run Harvester and they run Premier Inn. And I was just thinking, if I had a bad experience with a salad cart, then I would not, I'm unlikely to boycott Lenny Henry. But when you're G4S, it's all G4S. And so that also played a part in moving out into G4S. And it's relevant to the collective responsibility theme that we're looking at today. So I'm the director of the G4S Community business, which is self-contained. It's not a part of Park. It's on its own. And what we deliver is we provide treatment and support services for people in the justice system. And we only operate in Wales. We're not limited to Wales, but we were grown in Wales. We were established in Wales, and we love working in Wales. We like to identify and meet unmet needs. We like to consider how unmet need has led to offending behaviour, and then how we can manage to create services and support systems to meet the need, to reduce the likelihood of offending behaviour. Naturally, what sits really well with us is the fact that we provide the treatment for the DRRs and the ATRs. That's drug rehabilitation requirements and alcohol treatment requirements. They are part of community orders that can be given at courts for people who are convicted of offences. And recently we've started the mental health treatment requirement service, which is for all of Wales. We run services in South Wales. The Dyfodol service is in South Wales. We are present in the GDAS consortium in Gwent, in Dyfed, in the DDAS consortium. MHTR, we're actually in partnership with FPC, who are Forensic Psychology Consultancy, a private provider of psychology services who do a lot of work for the MOJ, for HMPPS. HMPPS, I'm getting into explaining all of the different abbreviations. His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service. I know there are some of you on the call who are from HMPPS, and I wasn't sure whether prison was first or probation, but I think I'll just move on because that might cause an argument. We work with a range of charities and non-profits and small to medium enterprises, and we got the term the customer. In the private sector, you work to a customer, and the customer is the person who commissions your service. They buy your services, but we work very much for the benefit of the community. And when it comes to the reputation and the collective perspective of what we do, then we very much like to encourage the viewpoint that I changed from and to, really, from suspicion of there being a private sector presence to a place where actually these are people working with people to help create change, to help reduce crime, and to promote safety. So our experience of working in collaboration and sharing responsibility to do more than we could individually. From the start of the Dyfodol contract, which was 2016 when I arrived in G4S Community, there was collaboration totally built into the DNA of who we were and what we did. At the time, the Dyfodol contract involved Kaleidoscope, who are a drug treatment charity, and Adferiad now, they were called Wakada. Adferiad is a merger of a number of different charities. We were working with Wakada and they merged in to become Adferiad. And what we found in the Dyfodol contract was actually when you find a contract that's being publicized, so a public sector organization needs a certain amount of work done, they advertise a contract. The contract is is then bid for by providers. And what we found was that the dyfodol contract was quite a large contract. It was quite a complicated contract. And in order to meet the expectations of that, again, large, complicated contract, then we found that we could work with Adferiad, and now Wakada, as they were Adferiad now, because they'd been in the prisons for years. So when we were looking at the contract, we thought, okay, there is already a charity in the public sector prisons. They already have the confidence of those who surround them. They already know their way around the establishment. They've already got good working relationships. And they've got a good deal of intelligence and insight. So rather than working separately, we created a consortium, and Adferiad joined the consortium. Kaleidoscope at the time were providing clinical services. So when you're looking at the substance use field, then part of it is psychosocial support, which is help and support and change behavior person to person. And part of it is a medical substitution of street drugs. And Kaleidoscope were involved in that medical substitution work. So they joined our consortium because they could provide that. They had experience, they had insight, and they had expertise. So we put together a consortium which was across sectors and working then private sector, third sector, working for the public sector in order to achieve far more collectively than we could have done separately. There was another really interesting contract we were involved with. We're not now, but it's being taken forward by a different consortium. And that was Future 4, where we worked with Safer Wales. Not all of the logos are on the screen of the people that we've worked with, but we worked with Safer Wales and Include being a non-profit. And the contract that was let was a complex contract. It involved women's services and it involved 18 to 25, so young adult services, which were not gender specific. And so we considered how we would be able to meet those needs. And we got talking to charities that we previously worked with, that we already had relationships with, and charities that we knew had specialisms that we didn't possess. So Safer Wales and Include came into the consortium with us, and they delivered a lot more of the contract than we did, even though we led the consortium. And the relationship was fantastic. We worked really well together, and that contract went on to demonstrate really, really good quality outcomes. So the fourth point here is partnering with the authority. And I think that it's worthwhile saying that a commissioning authority will always hold to account the provider of the service. And that's totally necessary. And in our event in the Senedd, we had an event to talk about the impact of our services at the end of July, beginning of July. And at that event, I said that accountability is support. And I thoroughly believe that if you're not held to account, then you can totally err from what it is you've agreed to deliver. You have to be held to account. So as a part of all of our contracts and services, we have contract review meetings with the authority. We provide data, we provide narrative, which talk about the breadth of services that we deliver, the volume of work we're undertaking, and then also the impact of that work in terms of some data of distance traveled from when people picked up support and when they left support, some stories of how people have seen their lives changed and transformed, and maybe some stories about how people have just coped with our help, because a lot of the people that we work with have got really significant challenges, and when we encounter them, they're in a police custody suite, they're in a courtroom, or they're in a prison, and their life has taken a negative trajectory. So stopping the negativity is a big task in and of itself. And if we can help stabilize people, then that's a really helpful thing to try and do. Our operating model is stability, change, and resilience. I haven't got a slide to cover this one, disappointingly for everyone. And so that is what we hope to do for anyone who needs our services. We hope to help them to achieve stability. And we think that if you're involved with alcohol or drugs, or if your mental health is deteriorating and causing you to get into legal difficulties and encounter the justice system, then stability is key. Change is essential. So we work with people, sometimes they achieve stability and think that that is the outcome. It's not the outcome, it's part of the outcome. So stability needs to be established, and then change can be worked upon, and then resilience. All of this is absolutely collaborative. So in the stability phase, for let's say a Class A user, we will have Kaleidoscope to undertake assessments for suitability for medication. We will also undertake assessments which talk to their dependency on substances, what it is in their lives that causes them to go back to substances, if they have a repeated pattern of doing better and then doing less well. We will be in touch with probation to talk to them about their risk assessments, whether people pose a risk of serious harm, risk of reoffending. And between the public sector probation service, between us and our charity partners in Kaleidoscope, we will collectively put together an assessment which leads to a lifestyle plan, which is seen as a care plan, which hopefully we can effectively work with the individual to create stability initially. And that can be the harm reduction of getting onto a prescription, potentially, which will remove the need for offending, which will remove the ingestion of harmful poisonous substances, which will remove the ingestion of too much of a volume of a substance. So we will give a measured and specific and overseen by a medical professional dose of a medication, which will remove a lot of risks. Stability might be achieved through that, but then we need to work one-to-one with the individual to help them to create some longer-term change. And when I say longer-term change, there are lots of different things that influence offending behaviour. There are lots of different things that influence substance use, and it can be help, just practical help, simple help with prevailing difficulties like homelessness, other health problems, social difficulties with relationships. It can be that they are bewildered by the justice system because it's not an easy place to be. So they can be practical help. They can be ongoing then psychologically informed help. When I was in probation, I really enjoyed running accredited programs, and some of you who know accredited programs might wonder why I enjoyed it, but it was brilliant to work with people in a group or one-to-one who could benefit from the theories of psychology, which were brought into a helpful intervention program that can create some change in the person's approach to their lives, in the person's understanding of who they are and how they've developed, in the person's understanding of how they process how other people behave, how agencies treat them, and how they move forward with that better understanding, managing themselves a little bit better and changing their future outcomes. I'm going to move on to what we have learned, and no doubt you'll read the bullet points immediately. The image on the right is from our impact event. And we've got John Paul, we've got Miriam, and we've got Dean. John Paul, Miriam, and Dean all had quite complex justice journeys, and they've all ultimately been helped by a variety of different agencies. John Paul was involved in Gwent, in our drug treatment services there, and he made contact with us. In fact, he made contact with us in Cardiff, because he was in Cardiff as well. He moved around, and he said, he wrote a letter of thanks to our agency that we were patient and helpful, and that he didn't appreciate it at the time, and that actually he was pretty disruptive. He came and spoke at our staff away day, and he told us that he lied to us, repeatedly lied to us. He withheld the truth. And it was just a fascinating presentation of utter honesty. At our event at the Senedd, again, he repeated that he was leading a lifestyle. He didn't even want to admit to himself the difficulties he was facing. He didn't want to talk to his worker and have his worker disappointed in him. John changed things massively. He told us that while we wouldn't have understood what he'd learned along the way because his behavior remained very negative, that there were things that he picked up from his support that he put into place and put into practice months and years after leaving contact with us. So John Paul's journey was amazing. He was helped by us. He was helped by a variety of medical professionals. He was helped by a variety of justice professionals and mechanisms. He'd been to prison. He met somebody at our impact event in the Senedd who previously sentenced him. And there was a wonderful reunion of these two figures who would have been, it seems, would have been at opposing points of the justice system or in opposing roles. But actually, when we think about it, the collective responsibility that we all share is that somebody imposing a sentence and somebody receiving a sentence, what are their aims? What are their ultimate hoped outcomes? A reduction in offending and improvement in lifestyles. What we've learned, so that was John Paul. In the middle is Miriam. Miriam has a film on our website, and actually it's on the Padlet link, which we will get to anyone on this call. Miriam totally changed her life after a prison sentence, and actually says we tend to campaign against short prison sentences for non-violent offences. She went to prison, and she says she changed because of the sentence. And sometimes something that isn't ideal actually attracts a good outcome, even though the process isn't ideal. But she came out, she really changed her life. She's amazing. And now she's doing some work with us to help us to design our services for women, because often services aren't designed with women in mind, more with men in mind. Miriam is remarkable. Please watch her video if you get the link. And then Dean is on the end. Dean came to our impact event after only being out for just a matter of weeks, I think. It might have been a couple of months, from Park Prison. Dean worked with our team in Park Prison, and he worked with a housing charity called Emmaus, and he's living in Emmaus now. And he's undertaking woodworking, training. He told us he was a supervisor. And although the change is quite recent with Dean, although we don't have years of testing with Dean, we have a guy who has changed, physically stands before you, changed man, and he might hit barriers again at some stage. He might hit new barriers and be unprepared for them, because the offending and drug use phase of his life took so long. He hasn't had the learning that maybe others have had to deal with a breadth of different challenges. He may hit the same challenges, but in a different way at a different time, when support's maybe not quite so strong. But Dean currently is amazing, and is a remarkable, my phone alarm just went off, a remarkable reference really for how different agencies can work together to help somebody to change and improve their future prospects. Our learning, politics, criminal justice and health, massively political. I listen to a political podcast. They're always discussing justice. They're always discussing health. 4 in 10 pounds of public money is spent on health. And I remember reading all kinds of things about the amount of money that the drug-related offending costs. And it's remarkable, because it costs so much, because the impact of spending money on justice matters means that money is not available for other things. It means that everybody's got an opinion. So our learning from working together, from actually trying to take collective responsibility, is that at any point, any one of a consortium, at any point, any sentence or any public policy approach to a particular pocket of offending could change. If there is a high profile disaster, if there's a high profile incident, policy can change, everything can change. And what we've learned through being in this sector for a while, and of course I was in the sector from 2004 in probation, is that while there are some helpful elements to change as a result of political pressure, then sometimes the political pressure creates change which is not helpful, which is reactionary. And I think the relationships that we establish when we're delivering this work are really important to trying to harness the helpful developments whilst cushioning ourselves and our services against the harmful ones. Currently, it's really tricky. Politics is really polarized, and I mean, even last week, I looked at the news last week talking about the prison release scheme on the Tuesday night. I was watching the news, and the way that it was being covered was alarmist, even by the BBC, who are, you know, generally quite reliable, and they've got their impartiality rules, haven't they? But I found it alarmist. Sky News led with a story about the prison release scheme, and then they cut to focusing on Park Prison and the story about the deaths in Park Prison over the last couple of years, which was remarkably not really linked with the news of the day. And yet, there we go, you know, it comes in, and we have campaigners that will campaign against, well, they'll campaign against private sector involvement, but they will campaign against all kinds of different things. And we've got to be strong in representing what we do that's good and effective. Change is inevitable. So politics sometimes brings change, public opinion sometimes brings change, but when you deliver services, you realize that change is inevitable and is necessary. And I suppose our learning on this is that when you strike up working relationships, you build consortia, authority, and when you work with a variety of other agencies, then improvements will be necessary. But that building a case for change doesn't necessarily mean that you have to discredit what exists. And it is really difficult when you're on the receiving end of somebody who's pushing for change and making the point for change based on criticizing, maybe unjustifiably, what currently exists. There's a lot of that going on at the moment, all over the place. I think there was a fact file, the justice system in Wales, I think it was called Prisons in Wales, a fact file, which I had a look at. And it was a fact file in that it had facts, but there were also opinions and interpretations of those facts, which sometimes were quite harsh. So the agenda for decentralizing justice and bringing it into the Welsh government remit, that might be a good idea. But what I'm not keen on is the notion of criticizing what currently is here to the point where everybody has lost confidence in it. We encounter this from time to time when there are difficulties. Alarm continues to go off. When there are difficulties in society, where there are maybe there's a high-profile offence, and the high-profile offence is totally regrettable and may have been, in some sense, preventable. But what we have is a dismantling reputationally of what currently exists. I think we can achieve change incrementally. We can achieve change dramatically by working together rather than criticising each other. Sectors can work together. When I was in the public sector, I was suspicious of the private sector. When I encountered the change in the probation service, and I was put into the CRC, the Community Rehabilitation Company, which was the outsourced private side, I encountered a hierarchy, a new hierarchy, which even within probation of the public sector colleagues and the private, the outsourced colleagues just not quite seeing eye to eye, because the public sector was considered to be the slightly more professional one. There is no need for that. When you look at how charities function, how private sector functions, how the public sector functions, there is fault and there are strengths in all. When I think of something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, the Dunning-Kruger effect talks about you not knowing what you don't know. So if you've got a little bit of knowledge on something, sometimes a small amount of knowledge creates a disproportionate level of confidence. And the more you learn about something, the more you learn that you don't know about it. And I think that sometimes you know your sector, you know your agency, and you look at another agency, you've got a little bit of knowledge on them, and you come to prominent judgments, which actually, if you spend some time together, you learn more about what they know, what their world consists of, and then you can gain a better respect. So sectors can work together. That takes humility and it takes time. It's linked with the next 3 points, really. Competition is a part of the work that we do. It's the part of the work that a lot of the charitable sector do as well. And we wait for opportunities to bid. And then we will read something on Sell to Wales or Contract Finder, or we'll hear an announcement from a colleague in HMPPS or the OPCC, the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and we'll get excited about an opportunity and bid against each other. Bidding against each other sometimes means that you raise your game and you demonstrate your ability, but sometimes it can go a bit sour, and we've experienced that. So in being pitched against each other, then we can really weaken our relationships that are so important to how we function together. And when I talk about relationships being key, I think the most key relationship is with the person using the service. So that's priority number one. You look after your service and your service user and their family, friends, neighbours, associates, and community. As well as that, then your relationship with your own team and your own staffing, you've got to look after your staff, but then your relationship with your colleagues and colleagues from other agencies and colleagues with your authority as well. The last point, the difference between the contracting is crucial point and the competition is necessary point, is this, that when we've encountered this a lot, we deliver a service and we establish that our service covers a proportion of the public, of the intended recipient of the service, but we also realize who it doesn't manage to serve. And so in our dyfodol service in Swansea, we found that there were women who were street working. They weren't suitable for our service suddenly because police decided they weren't going to criminalise them anymore. Because they didn't criminalise them, they didn't pick them up from the streets and bring them to police custody. They didn't encounter our custody staff, and therefore we didn't get the opportunity to offer them help. So because they were no longer being brought into police custody, they were missing out on a service. We were running the service and we noticed this. And where contracting is crucial is that we need to be held to account for everything we've promised to deliver, and our consortium partners as well. And we will work together to hold each other to account within that. We also notice things like this. And we must then really morally either seek permission from the authority to flex, to reach these people who are unreached, or get involved with the authority to develop new services. And that is something that we've done. So the collective responsibility element here is we're actually not just responsible for our contract, we're responsible for the community need that we encounter. And that's really, really important. We've done this a number of times, and so our relationship with our authority is one of accountability and support, but we've also been repeatedly encouraged and enabled by our consortium, by our commissioning authority, whether it's OPCC or HMPPS, or actually health board commissioners, in flexing, creating new services in order to reach people who are currently unreached. Just final remarks on the screen. That's our impact report on the left. At the bottom is a link. I'm not sure if you can cut and paste that link from this system, but we'll get you the link in the chat if it's not already there. Maybe Laura, actually, if you're able to pop it in the chat. And on the right is the event itself. So on the left is the impact report, which enriched the event, and on the right is the event itself. You can watch the entire video of the event. You'll get an overdose of me, so you can fast forward. But there are videos on there of people who've received our services, the services of Kaleidoscope, Adveriad, and us in the consortium, and who've received services that are linked with our Gwent work, the GDAS service there, where we work with Kaleidoscope and Barod. And it's really fascinating. Please check it out. But I just want to finish with the point that I think that when I think about life in general, and I encourage this on our staff induction. I do a bit of staff induction from time to time, and I talk to the teams about the fact that the communities exist of a whole load of different formal and informal codes of conduct, expectations of engagement and behaviour, and we hold each other to account according to those. It's also home to a load of different structures for support, and from friends, families, social clubs, societies related to hobbies and pastimes, educational settings and workplaces. There's a whole scene of informal justice that continually gets played out in life, and life is all about that collective responsibility. I think that when you get involved in delivering public services, that's almost removed from those informal networks. So we go from having a mantra, it takes a village to raise a child, to a mantra where maybe it takes a system to bring about justice and bring about well-being and enrichment. And then you realize that actually it's not just one system. We've got health, we've got justice, we've got all kinds of different systems going and commissioned in different ways. And maybe actually it actually does take a community. So whatever systems you're involved with, whoever is commissioning you, whoever you're working alongside, then the overarching aim really needs to be without sectors. It really needs to be without contract borders. When you think about what you do on a Saturday morning or any day of the week, you're a collaborator. Maybe you're a natural collaborator. Maybe you need the things that keep you alive, and there's education, health, taxation, public funding. Maybe you need a bit of private sector involvement when you stop at Costa for some refreshments, and actually not just Costa, for your groceries, your essentials. Maybe you encounter a bit of private sector involvement when you go to the pharmacy for the medication that keeps you healthy and fit. And then maybe you get involved in some non-profit for your hobbies and pastimes, or maybe you give some time. I think that when you think about what you need to survive and what you need to thrive, you are probably a multi-sector, multidisciplinary collaborator in your own lives. And when we talk about the people who use our services, we need to get back in touch with the fact that these are people from our communities, living in our communities, who live lives too. And I think that may change the outlook a little bit when looking at the professional service provider network and kaleidoscope of different agencies. And I think that definitely as agencies we need to consider this very carefully. And it would be great if we had a really strong conversation and dialogue, ongoing dialogue with policymakers and commissioning authorities about how we can always retain that sense that we're working with people for the benefits of people. We may be part of systems, but we're actually a part of the community, working for community good, not just for a set of KPIs against a specification, or even to deliver what we've been specifically appointed to deliver. I think that's where I'm going to leave it for now. I'm going to get my mouse working, and and I think I'll take this off the share so that we can maybe have a couple of questions. Is that okay, Mark?
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for those reflections. And I think also thank you for reminding me, because I was there at the beginning of Dyfodol, and thank you for reminding me it was so long ago. Was it 8 years? So
Yeah.
Time flies, doesn't it? So thanks for that reminder as well. Just opening up to the floor then, and any questions or comments on what we've heard from Ben. I've got a quick question, if I may, Ben, just to start off. In terms of, you said at the beginning about being a private sector business in a public sector environment. Just wondering, from your perspective, the challenges of that, and were there any barriers to break down in terms of concerns from the people within the public sector?
Yeah, there always are. It's really fascinating when I introduce myself as being from G4S, particularly in Wales, in our business. And I call it a business because it is a business. And actually, charities run very much like businesses. Schools have school business managers. And I know the GP surgeries have practice managers, business managers. So, you know, I call it a business. But in the sector, with charities and with public bodies, it's almost exclusively charities and public bodies that are involved in this kind of work. Yeah, there were attitude barriers. They have a suspicion that you're going to be making far more profit than a charity delivering the same service. So I've had quite frank conversations. I met with Professor Owen Griffiths, who was a great supporter of substance support and treatment in the Welsh, in the Senedd. And I explained, look, you know, the way that this works is we price up the cost of what we can deliver. We're very clear about what we need to send back to the centre in order to justify their support to us. And it's a business. They need to make some money, but it's declared at the start, and it is equivalent or less to the margins that the charities put in order to then fund charitable activities and things. So it's a tricky one, Mark, because we want to be really honest and open, and we have to be almost more honest, I think, than many other agencies. And we also have to demonstrate that we're in it because we believe in it. We're not just in it for the money. There was a magistrate I met in Merthyr who was fascinating. I was arguing, no, not arguing, but I was just saying, look, we need more DRRs, guys. There are people going to prison for short sentences who could be staying in the community and having a DRR. We know that because we're delivering services to prison leavers who've gone in for 4 months, 6 months, 8 months. And we're giving them substitute medication. So they could have been in the frame for a DRR. And he said, oh, you would say that, wouldn't you? You're private sector. The more numbers you get, the more money you earn. And I said, no, technically that's not correct. But it's not even correct in terms of our motivation. We're people who want to help people to change their lives. Now, I've got to manage the balances between my senior people who are holding me to account, running a business that pays its way and pays all the staff and, you know, pays the bills. But my wholehearted ambition is no different from when I was in the probation service back 10 years ago.
And I think the other thing on the back of that is, you know, it's about collective responsibility, as you say, isn't it? And it's about the communities and the people within the community and supporting the people with complex needs. And the other thing, the other question for me is about partnerships in terms of there's many different elements to it in terms of devolved and non-devolved, private and public, but also the fact that everybody wants to work in partnership, but it's difficult sometimes because of short-term funding and other responsibilities and other challenges, and it's just get your reflections on that, really, in terms of how do you go about bringing people together in terms of that consortia or approach sort of thing, in terms of, are there any principles or are there any specific goals and objectives that you work towards?
Yeah, I think when it comes to developing a consortium, relationships are really important. And we've worked with, as I said, we worked with Barod and Kaleidoscope for years. We've worked with Adferiad for years. We've worked with Safer Wales for many years, and often we will just have a level of trust with the people that we know well. Now, it is really difficult because you get towards the end of a consortium agreement, and maybe that consortium would come to a natural end, and those relationships will be, in some sense potentially damaged, because you're at the end, you're at a junction. We're at a junction with Dyfodol at the moment. We're not sure what it's going to look like next, and we're in a position where if it continues as it stands, then we have a consortium that's got a formation. But if it's changed and redesigned, then it's a case of considering what your strengths are. And I think for us, reflecting on that junction, then we need to know what we think we're good at, what we think we can demonstrate we're good at, and then we've got to talk to people who know what they're good at and see how we can blend to fulfill the brief of the contract that's let. But it is really difficult. It's so much more difficult here than it was in probation, when I had a job, and the need was there, the job was there, and I know that they outsourced it and they brought it all back in now, but life was far less complicated then. However, I do think that there is an agility about what we do that is really, really enjoyable, and a freedom around what we do that's also really, really enjoyable, that I didn't experience in the same way being a part of the big public sector structure. It's complicated, and it can involve a lot of diplomacy. But yeah.
Well, relationships are always complicated, aren't they? But I think one of the things for me as well, with one of the positives for Dyfodol was the long-term nature of it, and you were allowed, the system change was allowed to happen, and the proof was allowed to be developed in terms of evidence as well, isn't it? And one of the frustrations maybe there's the nature of short-term funding, and the frustration of having to prove a concept and the fact that it works within maybe 12 months or 18 months, which is difficult.
Yeah, it is. It's really difficult. We had the Future 4 contract that we had. We only barely mobilized it, partly because of COVID, when the evaluators came in, and so we were mobilizing and developing and having it evaluated at the same time, and it was just an uncomfortable moment. The Dyfodol contract was a really good size, actually. Cavdas in Cardiff, I think they've got a 10-year contract, which really gives them the freedom to solve problems early on, to be a bit adventurous, and to establish, really strong service level that everybody can rely on. I mean, I still call Snickers marathons from time to time. We're not quick to embrace change, are we? So when you got 2-year and 3-year contracts and changeovers, then that can be really disruptive.
Especially when you're talking about substance misuse and mental health, and the complexity of those problems as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ben. So just to open it up then, any questions or comments from anybody? Just checking the chat bar. Helen, just checking with you. Is there anything we've missed or I've missed in terms of questions or comments in the chat bar as we've gone through?
No, Mark, we haven't had anything. Thank you.
All right. Brilliant. Okay. Well, in that case then, not to delay everybody's lunch even further, what I will do is say thank you very much to Ben for your contribution today. I think there's some links in the chat bar if anybody's interested in terms of the impact report and the event as well. I hope you've enjoyed it. I just want to remind everybody about the awards, the Network Awards is on the website, and also tomorrow. It's short notice, but it's quite relevant to today's topic. There's a hackathon event tomorrow on synthetic opioids in Cardiff, and it starts at 9 o'clock. So if you do have a spare day and you would like to join us, then please link in with us or contact us and see the website for more information. But on that note then, thank you very much everybody. Enjoy the afternoon, enjoy the sunshine, and hope to see you again. And thank you again, Ben, and hope to see you in the future for catch up for coffee.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mark. Thank you all.
Thank you.